Hello YouTube, Ruth Bascu here again with another video. Prophecy Part 3. Today, as you can see, I have the lovely Anomaly, aka Zoe, here with me today. She's my little zombie. And we're going to cover a little bit more of her story, but don't worry, prophecy will be mentioned in it. As you know, there will always be her mentioned at some point in my story. So, let's start with kind of where we left off. So in the days and the years that followed, all broke out in Helix Nebula. The Ravengers moved further in to the space area, and the skirmishes started between the planets and the Ravengers. The planets would fight the Ravengers would shoot back. It was a galactic battle that probably would never come to an end. And during that time, poor Rella grew up in a world full of strife, sorrow, and unbalance. But she managed to handle it, as her mom and dad were always there. Then one day, while Vlad and his brother Zachary were out on recons, patrolling the planets and protecting them against Ravagers' attacks, his brother was behind him when the first wave hit. They got into a very hard skirmish and a very loud fight that lasted for over an hour. At the end of it, when he was taking count of all who had survived the fight, and the Ravagers had fled because they were outnumbered, he noticed that his brother's fighter was not within the group. He called for him several times, but they could not find him. They flew through and over and around Zamboi, but no response came from his jet. So returning to the base, and with great concern, he immediately went to Prophecy because he knew of her ability to see things. It was at this point, when this fight went down, that Zoe, in the lab, working on a permanent cure for her people for the zombie virus, that she heard the loud crash. It hit the main section of the lab, not in the back area where she's at that point. Zoe ran to the lab sealed-off window to see what had happened. When she saw the fighter inside through the ceiling, nose down. Inside was Zachary, her Zachary, there in that jet, in an area that was exposed now to the zombie virus. What could she do? She had to get to him. So putting on a med suit that was made from hazmat materials so that she could not be contaminated again, she walked over to the jet, down through the stairs and through the hall and into the area where the rebel was, moving a bunch of the rebels so that she can get to the hatch to open it. She then opened it up and pulled Zachary out. Laying him on a stretcher, she then returned back to the lab. Of course, he couldn't stay in the lab with everybody else, so he had to go into a quarantine room. He needed to be tested first and made sure that he had not contacted the zombie virus. Zoe knew that the people on the Dark Knight would be worried about Zachary, so she immediately notified them that she had found his ship, that it was crashed in her lab area, that he was now in quarantine and would not be able to return, probably indefinitely. Vlad, hearing this, was glad that his brother was alive, but devastated to know that his brother may have been contaminated by the zombie virus. There was no way to help them in any way. He had to let it be on his own. Prophecy had told him that he was alive, but he wasn't sure the conditions of it. Him and Prophecy spent the day together trying to figure out how they could help Zachary and Zamboya. In the lab, though, while he was in quarantine, he woke up from being unconscious from the hit on the head he took when his jet crashed into the lab. Zoe was there looking at him through the glass windows that separated them. She hit the button for the mic and told him, "Hi, Zachary, you're on Zamboi. We can't let you out, you know that. You need to stay in there until we know that you are not contagious or have not caught the zombie virus. I do have an antidote, but I don't know how well it'll work on you since your metabolism is different than ours here on Zamboi. Please, love, be patient." Zachary answered saying, "Thank you, Zoe. I understand. I just hope I'm not becoming one of them." "Me too," said Zoe. She went back into the lab area and started working with the things that she had set out to start making the potion cure. By looking at Zoe, you could tell that she had used the antidote on her, but it did not change her back to being normal skin toned. Instead, those that took the antidote remained blue-skinned and looked zombie-like. They had their faculties. They could think, talk, and act like anybody else. However, they were still contagious. It may not affect them, but they could pass it on to others, so they had to stay away from people who had not been exposed to it. Those who did not make it in the lab had been being monitored, and their way of changing and what they were doing was horrible. When they found people that had not been contaminated, they would bring them to the lab and put them in quarantine to make sure they were okay. But sometimes it would come up on situations where mobs of the zombies had actually gotten a hold of a whole family and were devouring them, body and mind and everything. It was a horrible thing. For these there was no hope and no rescue for, and they were immediately put out of their misery. Zombi would drop from half to under half of a population by the time it was over. And back in the lab, Zoe kept her constant work, and her companions around her, who also helped, were keeping constant work. And they obviously kept eyes on Zachary, for Zachary now had started to show signs of the zombie virus. He began to be unable to think clearly at times, and he'd keep mumbling he was so hungry. He'd try to lunge at them through the windows, even though his skin had not changed yet. He would try to break through the windows, demanding to be fed. Zoe waited until he had his back turned, and then she went in her protective suit and nailed him with a dart that would put him out for the day. As he was laying there unconscious, she hooked him up to an IV and began administering the antidote. She knew he would never be the same. He would never be able to have contact with his family and his people anymore. And she knew it wasn't her fault, but nonetheless, she still felt guilty. She needed to find an antidote that would cure everybody and destroy the virus completely. But she didn't know how or what to do. She needed more information on this virus, and she needed to be able to get a strand of it that was not treated with the antidote yet, so that she can study it more. So Zoe decided to do the unthinkable. While Zachary was laying in the quarantine room, recovering and resting, she put on a suit and went out into her planet, looking for someone that she could bring back and get a piece of virus information from them, a sample, one that had been turned but not completely turned, and one that would eventually not probably be able to be saved. There she found this one little child. It was just a little baby. She picked the child up, and it cooed at her. She knew the child was already exposed to the virus. She took the child back to the lab and placed it in a little tiny containment area that was made for children, and then she began to draw the blood samples from it. She took other samples too, skin samples and whatnot, and then she thought she would at least try the antidote on this infant and see if it affected children the same way as her and the people that survived. Once she had inoculated the infant with it, she watched him for 24 hours. The baby died within 28 hours, and there was nothing they could do about it. It neither recovered from the virus, nor did it show any more of recovering or decreasing into its zombie form. She, taking the child up in her arms, took it out into the back of the lab area, dug a small grave for it, and placed the infant in this grave. Who was his mother and dad, and were his mom and dad out there ravaging other people or themselves even, or even other zombies as they have been known to do them? Thankfully, thanks to the gods, this child was spared that horror, even though the death was a loss, and she felt it deeply. She buried the child and decided to plant a beautiful flower bush over this child's grave. The beautiful purple flowers from Diva were a perfect thing for this little garden, and the fruits would be beautiful to look at during the moonlight nights. So she planted this beautiful amethyst bush onto this little grave and watched it overnight. She went back to the lab and began doing her work again. By then, Zachary had awakened. He sat up and looked at her. What happened? You changed. I gave you the inoculation. He goes, but I don't look the same. I know, Zachary, and you don't look blue either. What? Well, when I gave my people the antidote, it only changed them back to being more normal. It didn't change the skin. You, however, being a Draculan, your body is different, and your skin didn't really turn back to its normal pale whiteness. It's kind of a off gray. Oh, he said, and then he looked. I will be like this forever? Yes, and you have the virus in you, so you cannot have physical contact with any of your family, friends, or people from the platoon that you were in. The squadron, he corrected her. Sorry, I'm not military. Okay. Well, you're going to learn a lot. Well, you're going to learn a lot because you're going to come out here and help me with this, trying to find this antidote. And so she let Zachary out, as he was now pretty as normal as he was going to get. So they began to work on an antidote. Then the wave hit, and it hit very hard. And everybody in the Helix galaxy knew that if they didn't find a way out of this galaxy, there would be no life. So Zoe contacted Prophecy, explained to Prophecy what was happening. They were bombarding the planet with other bombs and starting to tear her apart for her minerals and supplies of things they needed. She needed help, and she needed it fast. Is there any way you could set up the stasis rooms for my people to stay in, for us to stay in, until you can get us out of the galaxy? I can't stay here now. Our lab is under threat. And so Prophecy, in her infinite knowledge, knew what Zoe meant. And going into the stasis room, looking at the chambers at the stasis room, from bottom floor to the top, all the stasis chambers that the people will probably have to be kept in until they could find a way and a safe place to go. She then told her people what she had to do. Everybody cleared the stasis chamber area. Prophecy put on a protective suit, and then she began to concentrate on Zemboi. Opening a portal into Zemboi, she helped her people through, those that survived, and those that were still contaminated but were just now going under the antidote. She helped them all into certain stasis chambers. As they removed their clothes and put on the stasis suits, stepping into the stasis chambers, they were all each programmed to go into a deep stasis sleep until they could be woken again. Zoe decided to stay awake in the stasis room. She wanted to continue to work on a cure, for she was afraid there'd be more people contaminated eventually, and she needed to have a cure for everybody when it happened. Prophecy agreed. So from this time forward, no one was allowed into stasis room unless they were going to be going under stasis. And Zoe would have to put on a protective suit so she would not contaminate anybody during that time. In the meantime, Prophecy was back down in the computer room. Now that the stasis chambers were being activated, she needed to update the Dark Knight's lab computers so that it acknowledged the stasis chambers and would automatically keep them in working and in progress to keep the people in them alive. Rilla, who now at this time was 2.5, came toddling in to see what Mommy was doing. What doing, Mommy? She asked. I am trying to help people. Can Wella watch? Yes, but be very quiet and sit very still and don't touch anything. Rilla not, and she sat and watched her mommy work on the computers. Vlad came in after that. He looked at her and his daughter. He gave his daughter a kiss on the head, and he gave his wife a kiss too. He said, I have to go out on recons again, but don't worry. I'll be back, I'm pretty sure. Prophecy looked at him and said, I know you will. Then she got a call from Zoe. I need some more supplies up here. Can someone bring them up? Is that Zoe? Yes. And Vlad's up there too. But you can't go in. You'll have to stay outside and talk. Of course, I will. Immediately he ran to the elevator and went down into the stasis chamber. There he talked to his brother through the link, talking to him about his experience, making sure he was okay, and asking what supplies they needed. Zoe told them, and of course, Zachary, being the smartass he was, said, yeah, I can use a a half a gallon of cow's blood. Ha ha, you don't need that no more. I know. So he goes, can you get me a cow brain? I'll think on it, brother. Whatever. And then he left. He went and got the supplies that were needed by Zoe to continue her research. He brought the supplies of food that was needed for them to eat as well. And then he told them he was going on recon scouts again and that he would be back. He turned and walked away, not knowing that it could be his last time. It could be his last time. He left and got into his jet and flew and launched off of the Dark Knight. As he was patrolling the area, he noticed that Zamboi was now nothing but dust and debris. There was nothing of Zamboi left. The chunks of rocks that were floating through the air crashed into other asteroids, and he noticed that one of these big chunks was headed right for his own planet. His own planet. Then he knew he had to stop it. Recalling all of his platoon, he told them, we need to stop that asteroid. It's headed right for Dracula. We understand, Captain. And they flew around it and began firing at it to break it into small little pieces and into dust so that none of it would hit Dracula, for it was contaminated with the zombie virus they knew, as they had scanned it before. On his way back, they got into a skirmish. A pretty big one, too. One that actually knocked his ship out of orbit and further away from the Dark Knight. It would take him days to get back, he knew, because he was on the outer rim of his own galaxy. But he would get back. He knew he would. So hitting it on full gear and hitting it on light speed, he headed back to the Dark Knight. He kept calling in and hoping to hear a voice. Eventually he did, but he was still 2 days out. Well, I'm still alive. I'm headed back, but that was a pretty good fight. Did anyone make it back? No, Captain. No one made it back. His heart sunk. His whole group was gone. So as he flew that night, avoiding skirmishes with the Ravengers, he began to feel tired and then decided to sleep. He put his jet on auto, put it into visible so it wouldn't be seen, and lay and stretched out in his chair to sleep there as he drifted through space. When he woke up the next day, he was even closer, actually closer than he thought he would be, because now he could actually see the Dark Knight in the distance. He came and docked the next morning at 6:30 a.m. He got out and went to the quarters where the colonels were at. He talked to them, they talked to him. Funeral plans were made and families were in sorrow. He told them what he had seen over Dracul and now was feared for his own people. And that is Prophecy Part 3. I hope you guys liked this video. If you did, let me know. Leave comments below. I will again try to make more videos like this as more often as I can, as I'm going to get deeper and deeper into how things work out and where the Dark Knight ends and where Prophecy begins her full and complete life with her friends. So stay tuned and blessed be. Have fun. Play with smart dolls.